Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello, I welcome you all to the second lecture of week 2 of the course Modernization and Creative Communication. Today we are going to engage with most important transitions in human history, modernization, and see how it reshaped societies across the globe. We will explore what modernization really means, how societies moved from being static and agrarian to becoming industrial and urban, and most importantly, the role of creativity and communication in this transformation. Why is this topic important? Because modernization is the foundation of the modern world as we know it today. From the birth of democracy to the rise of capitalism and science, this journey is fascinating and critical for us to understand the systems we live in now. Throughout today's lecture, we will explore the historical roots, the key thinkers, phases, impacts, and even the criticisms of modernization. By the end, you will have a deeper understanding of how societies transformed and how they continue to evolve. Now, to understand modernization, we must first look at the pre-modern societies, or what we call the pre-modern societies, which existed before technological, industrial, and social changes that affected modernity. Now, these societies, what we call the pre-modern societies, were static, organized around traditions, religion, and feudal systems, where roles and obligations were inherited. Predominantly agrarian economies relied on subsistence farming with minimal trade and basic technology. Life was slow, with little room for innovation or progress. The social structure was rigid, with clear class divisions, and mobility was almost impossible. People's roles were determined at birth, and collective identity took precedence over individuality. Politically, monarchies ruled by divine right, making their authority unquestionable. The church controlled education and knowledge, suppressing ideas that contradicted religious teachings. However, change began in the 14th century with the Renaissance and Reformation. The Renaissance reviewed classical knowledge and celebrated human creativity, while the Reformation challenged the authority of the church. The scientific revolution accelerated this shift, with scientists like Galileo and Newton promoting observation and reason over superstition. These movements laid the foundation for the Enlightenment, which inspired the transition to modern societies focused on reason, progress, and human agency. At its core, modernization is a process of transitioning from traditional agrarian societies to industrialized, urbanized, and modern ones. This process reshaped economics, politics, and social structures, leading to a new vision of society centered on progress, individual freedoms, and scientific rationality. Modernization involves several key processes. The first is technological innovation, where advancement is machinery, science, and industry transformed productivity and economic systems. The introduction of steam engines, mechanized looms, and electricity during the Industrial Revolution revolutionized production, transportation, and communication. The second process is social transformation. Modernization emphasized individualism and personal freedom, moving away from the collective obligations of pre-modern societies. Laws became secular rather than religious, and merit replaced inherited status as a basis for social mobility. Finally, modernization brought about political shifts. Democracy emerged as a more inclusive and rational form of governance, replacing monarchies that ruled by divine right. Constitutional governance, political participation, and the protection of individual rights became defining features of modern states. The outcome of modernization is what we call modernity. Modernity is characterized by individual freedom, industrial production, rational governance, and scientific progress. Unlike pre-modern societies, modern societies are dynamic, innovative, and constantly evolving. Modernization can be understood in three main phases. The pre-modern phase, the first is the pre-modern phase, where societies were agrarian and static. The Enlightenment phase, where the reason, science, and democracy began to, cut into traditional systems. The industrialization phase, where technological innovation and capitalism drove economic and social transformation. Now, pre-modern societies existed before industrialization. The Enlightenment and modern technologies were characterized by stability, tradition, and limited change. They laid the foundation for modern civilization. Economically, the societies, as I have previously mentioned, were agrarian, with most people engaged in subsistence farming, producing just enough food to survive. Trade was minimal, often based on barter, and technological innovation was limited, resulting in low productivity. Socially, pre-modern societies were marked by rigid hierarchies. In Europe, feudalism divided society into distinct classes with little social mobility. Collective identity, centered on family, community, and religion, took precedence over individual autonomy. Politically, monarchies governed under the divine right of kings, concentrating power in a single ruler and maintaining order without promoting individual freedoms or progress. Religion played a central role, with the church controlling education, knowledge, and intellectual life, stifling scientific inquiry. Questioning religious doctrine could lead to persecution, as seen in the case of Galileo. Pre-modern societies were static, resistant to change, and focused on maintaining stability, providing a foundation that would soon be challenged by the Enlightenment and the rise of modernization. Early thinkers played a significant role in explaining the transition from pre-modern societies to modern ones. Their theories offered insights into how societal structures evolve and what drives progress. One of the thinkers that is worth mentioning is Adam Smith. In a seminal work, The Wealth of Nations, Smith argued that economic freedom and technological innovation foster human progress. He believed that free markets and competition could break the constraints of tradition and lead to prosperity. Smith's idea of the invisible hand illustrated how individual self-interest, when allowed to operate freely, contributes to the greater good of the society. Another thinker worth mentioning is Henry Maine. He described the transition from status to contract in pre-modern society. Roles were determined by status. People's obligations were inherited, often tied to family, caste, or feudal systems. In modern societies, relationships became contractual, based on agreements and personal choice. This shift promoted individual autonomy and freedom, breaking away from rigid traditional obligations. Ferdinand Tönnies introduced the concept of Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft. Gemeinschaft refers to traditional rural communities where relationships are personal, close-knit, and based on shared values. Gesellschaft, on the other hand, describes modern urban societies where relationships are far more impersonal, formal, and individualistic. Another thinker worth mentioning about is Emily Durkheim. Emily Durkheim explained how societies maintain cohesion as they transit from traditional to modern structures. In pre-modern societies, mechanical solidarity holds people together through shared tasks, belief, and the ways of life. For example, in small farming communities, everyone contributes to the same goal: survival. In modern societies, organic solidarity emerges where people rely on each other due to specialized roles. A factory worker depends on farmers for food, while farmers depend on manufacturers for tools. This interdependence creates social cohesion in modern industrialized systems. These thinkers laid the intellectual groundwork for understanding modernization as a process of moving from static collective societies to dynamic individual focused systems. They highlight how technology, economic freedom, and social transformation drive progress. The Enlightenment was a transformative period, bridging pre-modern societies with the modern age. It emerged from cultural movements like the Renaissance and Reformation. The Renaissance revived classical learning, celebrating humanism and creativity, challenging the church's control over knowledge. The Reformation weakened the church's authority, promoting individual responsibility and critical thinking. The scientific revolution further shaped Enlightenment thought, with figures like Galileo, Newton, and Descartes advancing methods based on observation and reason. Their work showed that knowledge could be separated from religious doctrine. Key shift included the decline of feudalism and the rise of capitalism, urbanization, and a middle class focused on trade and innovation. As scientific and rational inquiry grew, religious authority weakened, paving the way for secular governance. At the heart of the Enlightenment was the belief in rational inquiry, human agency, and progress through education, science, and reason. These ideas inspired revolutions, discoveries, and reforms that continue to shape the modern society. The Enlightenment was guided by key themes: reason, human progress, freedom, and equality that reshaped views on society and the world, laying the groundwork for modernization. Reason was central, with Enlightenment thinkers rejecting superstition and tradition in favor of logic and rational thought. Immanuel Kant's idea of sapere aude urged people to think for themselves, promoting intellectual independence. The belief in human progress was another core theme. Thinkers were optimistic that education, science, and technology could improve society and solve real world problems, as seen in advancements by Newton and medical innovations. Freedom and equality were also central. John Locke's ideas on natural rights formed the foundation for modern democracy, while Montesquieu's theory of separation of powers and Mary Wollstonecraft's advocacy for women's rights further advanced these principles. Enlightenment thinkers critiqued authority, challenging both monarchies and the church. This led to secular governance and constitutional states, as exemplified by the American and French Revolution. Globally, Enlightenment ideas inspired revolutions and independence movements, shaping modern political, social, and scientific thought. These themes continue to influence concepts of democracy, individual rights, and progress today. Who were the major thinkers of Enlightenment? The Enlightenment was a period of intellectual transformation and that laid to the groundwork for the modern societies. It was defined by a belief in reason, progress, and human agency. Several key thinkers emerged during this time, and their ideas profoundly shaped politics, science, education, and social structures. Let us meet some of those most influential minds of the Enlightenment. John Locke. Now, John Locke is often regarded as the father of liberalism. He introduced the idea of natural rights, which he defined as life, liberty, and property. According to Locke, these rights were inherent to every individual and could not be taken away. He also argued that governments derived their authority from the consent of the governed. In his work, Two Treatises of Government, Locke proposed that if a government failed to protect people's natural right, the people had the right to overthrow it. His ideas inspired modern democracies and were foundational to the American Revolution and the US Constitution. Another thinker was Voltaire, the most vocal critique of religious dogma and intolerance. Voltaire championed freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and secular governance. He used wit and satire to expose the corruption of the church and totalitarian monarchies. Voltaire famously said, "I do not agree with what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it." emphasizing the importance of free expression as a cornerstone of modern societies. Montesquieu contributed significantly to political theory with his idea of the separation of powers. In his work, The Spirit of the Laws, Montesquieu argued that powers should be divided among legislative, executive, and judicial branches to ensure checks and balances. This idea became the foundation for modern constitutional governance, ensuring that no single branch of government could dominate or abuse power. We have Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Rousseau's introduced the concept of the social contract, a philosophical idea that individuals agree to form governments to protect their rights and well-being. Unlike Locke, Rousseau believed that the general will, the collective interest of the people, should guide governance. His ideas inspired revolutionary movements, particularly the French Revolution, and contributed to modern concepts of democracy and citizenship. Then there was Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant defined Enlightenment as humanity's emergence from self-incurred immaturity. Kant encouraged individuals to use their reason and intellect, famously declaring, "Dare to think for yourself." He emphasized autonomy, education, and the importance of critical thinking in freeing humanity from ignorance and superstition. Mary Wollstonecraft was one of the earliest advocates for women's rights. In a work, A Vindication of the Rights of Women, Wollstonecraft argued that women were not naturally inferior to men, but appeared so because of a lack of access to education. She called for equal educational opportunities for women, laying the foundation for modern feminist movements. These Enlightenment thinkers fundamentally changed how societies viewed governance, religion, individual rights, and progress. The ideas continue to shape modern political systems, scientific thought, and social structures, reminding us of the power of reason and critical inquiry. What was the impact of the Enlightenment on modernization? The Enlightenment had a profound impact on modernization, transforming politics, economics, society, and education. Politically, it led to rise of democracy, replacing monarchies with constitutional systems that emphasized individual rights and the rule of law. The American and the French revolutions exemplified these changes, establishing governments based on liberty, equality, and the consent of the governed. Scientifically, Enlightenment ideas sparked the Industrial Revolution, encouraging practical applications of knowledge. Innovations like the steam engine and mechanized looms revolutionized production and trade. Socially, the Enlightenment promoted individual rights and equality, eroding traditional hierarchies. Education and literacy empowered people to think critically and improve their lives. Economically, the Enlightenment fostered capitalism and urbanization, shifting wealth from land ownership to innovation and productivity. Its influence extended globally, inspiring independence movements and anti-colonial struggles. Overall, the Enlightenment laid the foundation for the political, economic, and social rehauling of the modern world. The transition to modernization was marked by a series of interconnected developments that reshaped societies, economics, and governance systems. It was not a sudden process, but occurred gradually through key changes that laid the foundation for the modern world. What was the first major driving force of modernization? The major driver of modernization happened to be technological innovation. The Industrial Revolution, which began in the 18th century, introduced groundbreaking inventions that transformed production and transformation. We call this a great accelerationist phase. The steam engine, the production of steam engine revolutionized industries by replacing manual labor with mechanized processes, drastically increasing productivity. Factories emerged as centers of production, shifting economic activity from the rural farms to urban industries. Innovations like mechanized looms and railways further connected markets, facilitated trade, and spurred economic growth. Alongside technological advancement came urbanization. As factories and industries grew, people began to migrate from rural areas to cities in search of employment opportunities. Urban centers expanded rapidly, creating hubs of economic activity, innovation, and cultural exchange. Cities became symbols of modernity, representing progress, opportunity, and dynamism. However, urbanization also brought challenges such as overcrowding, sanitation problems, and the rise of urban poverty. Economically, modernization saw the rise of capitalism and global trade. Traditional agrarian economies were replaced with market driven systems where productivity, innovation, and competition became central. Wealth was no longer tied to land ownership, but to industrial output, trade, and entrepreneurship. The middle class emerged as a powerful force driving economic and social change. The transition to modernization also transformed the social classes and institutions. Feudal hierarchies gave way to new systems of social organization where merit and individual achievement began to replace inherited status. Education became a critical tool for social mobility as schools and universities provided the knowledge and skills needed to succeed in industrialized economies. Modern institutions such as courts, legal systems, and democratic governments emerged, reflecting Enlightenment ideals of rational governance and equality. In essence, the transition to modernization was a period of profound change. It replaced tradition with innovation, hierarchy with equality, and stagnation with progress. While modernization brought challenges and inequalities, it also created opportunities for greater freedom, prosperity, and human advancement. While modernization has driven progress, it has faced significant criticism. One major critique is its Eurocentrism, assuming that Western Europe path represents a universal model of progress. This overlooks the histories and achievements of non-Western societies, such as advanced agricultural techniques in Africa or trade systems during the Islamic Golden Age. Modernization also oversimplifies tradition, portraying traditional societies as static and inferior. Many indigenous cultures have long standing knowledge and systems that modern practices often overlook, such as ecological knowledge of the emergent tribes. Dependency theory critiques the idea that modernization benefits all societies, arguing that Western development often came at the expense of the global South. Colonization exploited resources and labor, creating global inequalities that hindered progress in post-colonial nations. Another issue is the imposition of Western values. Modernization often forces Western systems of capitalism, democracy, and secularism onto non Western societies, eroding local traditions and creating instability. The Frankfurt School, particularly Horkheimer and Adorno, criticized the Enlightenment dark side, arguing that instrumental reason used for specific goals could lead to exploitation and dehumanization, as seen in the industrial revolution's societal and environmental cost. In summary, while modernization has brought technological and economic advances, it is important to recognize its limitations, including its Eurocentrism and its failure to address global inequalities. A more inclusive approach to progress values diversity, sustainability, and cultural integrity. In this lecture, we explored the historical journey of modernization, how societies moved from pre-modern agrarian systems to industrial, urbanized, and modern ones. We begin by understanding the characteristics of pre-modern societies, where economies were based on subsistence farming, social structures were rigid and hierarchical, and religion dominated every aspect of life. These societies, as we said, were static, resistant to change, and lacked the dynamism needed for progress. The Enlightenment emerged as the turning point in this journey. Thinkers of the Enlightenment, John Locke, Montesquieu, Voltaire, Rousseau, Immanuel Kant, and Mary Wollstonecraft, introduced revolutionary ideas that contested tradition and promoted reason, individual rights, and human progress. By questioning the authority of monarchies and the church, they laid the intellectual foundation for the democracy, secular governance, and scientific advancement. The ideas inspired major political revolutions, such as the American and French revolutions, and drove the technological innovations of the industrial revolutions. Modernization brought profound changes to every aspect of human life. Politically, it replaced monarchies with constitutional democracies that protected individual freedoms and promoted equality. Economically, it fueled the rise of capitalism, urbanization, and global trade, transforming agrarian societies into industrial powerhouses. Socially, modernization emphasized individual autonomy, education, and meritocracy, breaking away from the rigid dogmatic norms and traditional hierarchies. Technological and scientific advancement improved living conditions, extended life expectancy, and enabled humanity to exert control over nature. However, modernization has not been without challenges and criticisms. Scholars have pointed out that modernization theory is often Eurocentric, assuming that Western models of development are universally applicable. It oversimplifies traditional societies, dismantling their cultural and historical complexity. Dependency theorists argue that modernization has reinforced global inequalities as Western nations developed by exploiting others. The Frankfurt School further critiques modernization for its reliance on instrumental reason, which can lead to environmental destruction, work exploitation, and new forms of social control. Despite these criticisms, modernization remains one of the most significant processes in human history. It has shaped the world in which we live today, creating systems of governance, economies, and technology that define modernity. By critically engaging with the history and impact of modernization, we can better understand its achievements, limitations, and possibilities for the future. As we conclude, let's reflect on some of the few questions or some of the key questions. What does progress really mean, and who defines it? How can we address the inequalities and contradictions of modernization? Can we build a future that balances technological advancement with sustainability, equity, and cultural diversity? Modernization is not a single linear process. It's a complex and ongoing transformation that requires us to think critically, act responsibly, and imagine new ways of creating a better world. Thank you for joining today's lecture. I hope this discussion has given you a deeper understanding of the historical forces that shaped modern society and the ongoing debates around modernization. As you continue exploring these ideas, remember to question, analyze, and think creatively about the world we live in. See you all in the next lecture. Thank you.